such interesting presentations. I'll ask if we can get some questions up on the monitor. But let me ask both of you the same question firstly to start. When you look at the skills that people are likely to need in the 21st century, and there's quite a range from both of your presentations, are there any countries where you think the educational institutions generally are doing that quite well, and what can we learn from those places, if so, David?
Well, I've been a big believer in all my work that actually lots of countries do well at different aspects, and you see their economic systems kind of reflecting that. So, well-known example, right, the Germanic countries have been great at apprenticeship for a long time, but it's not just their apprenticeship programs, it's a whole set of surrounding societal institutions and economic ones that enable those apprentices to find good jobs, be high status. And so I think it's important to say, we can't just go and say, oh, Singapore does great at this, we'll take that. Traveling, benchmarking, learning is huge, but recognizing that countries are good at different things. I think some of the data we saw yesterday suggests that some of the Scandinavian countries, Japan, Singapore, what they do a really good job at is getting everybody up to a really high base so that they're at least prepared to engage in all this. If you look at the US, you know, our strength, I would say, is still in the research university end. We've been really good at that, at creating an environment where really bright people from all over the world want to come and innovate and create. I think Australia's been very good at that as well. And so I think you see different examples in different places.
What do you think, Charles?
I certainly agree with David. It is a nuanced world. It's not, there's no single place that has it all. The US, for example, is more entrepreneurial, etc. So, but if you look at all 12 parameters that we listed, you know, the 4 C's of skills and so on, absolutely nobody in the world does all of this. Nobody. Some systems may do some of them, and the challenge we always ask is, even for a teacher in a classroom, if a teacher will say, well, I teach these things, say, okay, can you prove to me that you're teaching this deliberately, systematically, comprehensively, and demonstrably? And I say, no, right? So sometimes, haphazardly, some of these things might happen, but to do so in a systematic way, no. And so we don't have good examples, but that's what being at the pioneering edge implies. We are creating that system. We don't have something else to follow, to mimic.
There's also a couple of microphones in the aisles, so if anyone would like to ask a question, if you come and line up at one of those, I will call on you. There's no questions coming through on the monitor, it's just the Q&A screen there. Charles, you talked about the need for people to be sort of flexible and dexterous like a Swiss Army knife, and we heard yesterday that educational institutions need to be flexible as well. What are the hallmarks of a flexible organisation?
Well, to literally embrace that as its change management philosophy. You know, it has to become what everybody in the organization believes. It starts with the top, but it perdures with everybody else. So it's leading by example. It is making the hard choices on a constant basis. It's not sitting on your laurels. It is not accepting dogma that dates back, whatever, 20 to 2,000 years as being the right answer. Constantly asking yourself the hard question, why are we doing what we're doing, and is it still valid to do? Sometimes the answer will be yes, stay the course. And sometimes we'll have to change. And it's really, really hard in successful systems to do so, because the success is there to say, well, but it's done us well so far. And yes, you're right, for instance, mass schooling has done really well so far for 150 years. Now, should we rethink what gets taught? Absolutely. I think we're at a critical juncture here.
How can institutions be flexible, though, David, when you have to design a course and implement it? It's a big ship to be flexible with.
Yeah. One of my favorite expressions in education is you can get away with almost anything if you call it a pilot. And so, so I think it is useful to really listen to your employers. I think one thing colleges and polytechnics are great at is building close relationships with employers so that you can design something together. So we have a really nice example right now at Chatham where one of our leading health providers saw our data analytics degree and said, we'd really like that, but we'd actually really like it in only small chunks, and we'd like to use our own data system, if you don't mind. Could you come in and tailor that in that? And we did, and they liked it so much, then they said, would you design this? And now we want to extend it to our customers. And so I think if you can learn to really listen to the people you're trying to serve and try to respond quickly, knowing it's not going to be perfect the first time, but that you're able to iterate. So that fast fail, learn, and improve, I think can really take you a long way.
With what you pointed out to us at Chatham with the sort of sustainability being front and centre on campus, is that something that is unique to that institution, or is it something that you're seeing more of around the place?
No, there's a whole network, a group called Second Nature of universities around the world that have made a commitment to be carbon neutral by a certain date, 2025 or 2030. And I think one of the reasons it's incumbent on us, right, is a lot of companies are thinking about the next quarter. If we're responsible leaders in higher ed, we should be thinking decades out in terms of the preservation. And so we have the time frame, we have the ability to make investments that may not pay off in 2 years, but could do it in 5. And so I think you're seeing more and more. The other big driver of it is if you look at surveys of the people coming to our institutions, 94% of this Generation Z say environment is right at the top of their list for things that are important because they know this is the world they're going to live in. And so we're getting it from both ends. There's the demands out there in terms of the problems, but we're also seeing it from the people we serve.
Okay. Have you got a question there?
Yes, Marc Nantel, Niagara College, Canada. I perfectly agree about the T-shaped person. It's fantastic. And to aspire to, at least when some of our graduates come out, notwithstanding lifelong learning, of course, that they should be Renaissance people. We've been focusing on the end product, if you want, of their journey through our institutions. How do you deal with the ingredients that come in? The people coming into our institutions have varied experiences, varied level of preparation, they learn differently. How does one go from that hodgepodge to your ideal Renaissance people at the end?
Charles?
Isn't that your job?
Lovely.
That's an easy out for me, but look, in reality, every step of the process should be preparing for the sort of profile, right? So it's unfair to put the entire burden on just one slice of the process. I completely grant you that. The same way it wouldn't be fair to put it on the back of businesses either, or just on K through 12. It's something that has to be embedded, in the entire system. But, universities certainly have a wonderful moment in the life of these students to shape them. Fair enough?
Charles, you had that graphic where you showed that the AI was good for the things that could be very clearly defined. It's hard for the things with the broad scope skills. Will computers ever be able to learn broad scope skills?
Your guess is as good as mine. Every time we've seen surveys done by experts and non-experts alike, everybody says, oh, in 30 to 40 years. And it has been more than 30 to 40 years that we've had these predictions. The reality is we don't know. We have no idea when generalized intelligence may or may not happen. It will take several breakthroughs. We're not there. So, however, it doesn't take, a all singing and dancing humanoid to replace tasks. For example, if I have very solid e-discovery software, I may need fewer paralegals and fewer junior lawyers. By the way, this trend started with even offshoring this process, and now it can be automated. So we don't have to wait for this to see serious impact. You can imagine also this little robot that greets you at home being a wonderful little companion. Does this mean that we're going to value human relationships slightly less because that little companion is always happy to see you, et cetera, et cetera. So I think impact can start. Oh, here's another example of impact. Remember the Tamagotchis, the little things that kids wore? We anthropomorphized them, right? We think that they're human, and the kids had a real hard time having them hungry or die or whatever. We anthropomorphize our own machines. And that happens without it being anywhere near smart, not even close to smart. So we're going to see a lot of impact, not due to brilliant intelligence, but just death by 1,000 cuts. Lots of little things all happening, and each one having an impact.
Plus, they won't have, you said that thing about, with your partner, you come home and they grumble like, why didn't you stack the dishwasher? You're not going to have that with the robot. They will have done it.
Exactly.
Hopefully. Question?
Yeah, Craig Elias, Bovide College in downtown Calgary. I'm sure there's lots of people in this room that are trying to facilitate change in their own organization. We're trying to accomplish long-term goals, but it seems like we're always given these short-term measurables we have to somehow meet as we're trying to find a way to make this long-term change. What are some of the ways to manage sometimes that challenge?
Do you want to take that one, David?
Sure. I mean, I think it is one of the biggest ones we face, and it's not just within the organization, but the way in which all of the organizations, or many of them, are rewarded from funding streams for what they're doing, and it's much easier to focus on those short-term, narrow outcomes than some of the broader, longer-term things we're describing. I guess one of the ways that I see as possible is to try to look for ways in good pedagogy and good, well-designed courses where even if it's by stealth, that you can embed a lot of the things that we're talking about into while delivering the narrow. And I know it's hard because there's so much time pressure these days and lack of resources to do things, but I do think, for example, in what we're seeing with sustainability is you can focus on, are you able to deal with this new form of solar energy? Are you able to deal with this water issue? But teach a lot of those broader things within that when you're getting people out there solving real world problems.
David, how quickly are the skills required for 21st century living changing? For example, if we have this conference in 3 years, is your presentation going to be entirely different?
Well, it was a little bit of what I was worried about because I've been doing less research the last few years. I think a lot of the themes you see, not just 3 years ago, but even if you go back to the 90s, the notion of soft skills, a lot of these things were still there, but things like where we are now with artificial intelligence weren't there in anywhere like as big a way. And so I think there will be elements that will be consistent and others where we may just not be able to predict exactly what that new wrinkle will be. We haven't even talked here about the biotech side of this and things that are happening with CRISPR and other things, implantables, all sorts of things that I think could also have really big implications, but where we're just at the early cusp of seeing what they're going to do.
To play devil's advocate, Charles, couldn't you argue that people at every era have had to be adaptable and resilient? Because technology's always been changing.
Of course. I mean, we talk about these 21st century skills, and I'm one of the offenders having written the book about it. But, these vastly predate the 21st century. Clearly, we have needed to be innovative back even in the dawn of civilizations. Okay, so this is not new. What is new, however, is the rate of change. Right? That is the new thing. We had 1,000 years to adapt from one transition to the other. Now we have 10 years. And so it's no longer a luxury of leaving it, let's say, to life to teach you these things. It's a necessity to embed that in the normal education that everyone gets, K through college. And that's the difference. And so it's a pressure to make it happen. And to go to your earlier question to David, one key aspect, yes, is to make it happen in a real-world relevant way. But it's also critical for all your faculty to take a long, hard look at how much they have loaded things on the content side and free up time and space so we can teach more deeply, fewer things that actually truly matter, not just the things they love because they're an expert at the field. And that's so hard for an expert to do, deconstruct what is really necessary for their discipline, to free up time and space to think about concepts that you want to learn, as well as competencies you have to learn. That's the crux of the matter.
We're out of time for this session. Could I get you to thank our two speakers, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.